Hello fellow Megatenists and welcome to the Megaten Minute. Today I'm going to be ruining some popular theory crafting. This is something I've also repeated over the years, but I learned the truth, so it ends now. Recently I reignited my battle with the idea of connecting Megaten games. I know there are some official timelines that connect some of the games together, but I know of even more fan timelines that clearly missed the mark, and boy, do they do that. I can't understand why someone would make a mangled mess of spaghetti, throw around some titles of some games that they aren't familiar with, and call it a day. These things are interesting thought experiments, but not much more in my opinion. A concept that runs through my head when rationalizing timelines is, what was the intent, and does it enhance the game? Let's look at an easy one. For the Devil Summoner series, hands down, it enhances the games 100% for them to be connected. A hard-boiled series about a fictional demon-taming clan benefits from having games expanding on the lore, which was never finished, by the way. Who are the other two Kuzunoa branches, huh? So in a franchise like Megami Tensei, you'll have spin-offs like Persona where the grounding mythos isn't that important and will change over time while also breaching into fan service. Give us that sort of thing, that's fine. I've seen people connect the games by using common terminology and items from the games like magnetite, and the way that many games have a Makai realm or something similar to that, which could be related to the Sea of Souls if you really wanted to kind of force that. But honestly, just look at the staff. The games that all seem to be connected have basically all of the same staff working on the games. And generally, the timelines that team has published excludes Majin Tensei, Last Bible, Devil Children, and Devil Survivor. To me, it makes sense that the small body of work that they've worked on together would connect in some way. But not always. The stories are generally self-contained. So if you look at the official timelines and just follow the natural progression of the stories, many different things spawn from SMT1. What if the bombs didn't drop? What if they did? What if we made a bunch of games that most people know about but haven't played? Then you get the new boys. Nocturne, Strange Journey, SMT4. These guys don't connect to anything. They are strong, independent RPGs that don't need no multiverse. Except the fans gave them one anyway. That topic is for another time though. And get it? Timeline time. But also, seriously, I will talk about the timeline more later in another video. What I want to specifically address is a character from Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne, Joji Hijiri. Hijiri is a writer for an occult magazine, Ayakashi Monthly. He is the George Tsoukalokos of Nocturne, believing in conspiracy and things deeper than what we can see. Here's where I spoil Nocturne, so stop watching if you haven't played it. Well, Hijiri's dead. He's also a mannequin. He's a special mannequin, actually. Here's his story arc. He gives you a magazine, you meet him at the Amalodrome, he tells you all about Hikawa, then he tells you about the creation of mannequins, he tells you about the nightmare system, then he tells you how reasons work, and then he goes crazy, and now he's omniscient, and he wants to keep the terminal power to himself, and now he also wants to create his own reason, and it's gonna be a cool reason with blackjack and hookers. Osamu then tells you all about Hijiri and how he's just using you and he's gonna sacrifice you, and then bye-bye Hijiri. So much for the guy whose name means saint, huh? Says a lot about our society, to be honest. That's Hijiri's story as told in Nocturne Vanilla. The version that was released a year later, which is also the version we got, included an entire exposition explaining the backstory of Hijiri. Here's what the lady in black says about Hijiri.
Let me conclude by telling you about a human who crossed your path. One who is drifting, being kept alive by fate. It is my master's wish that you listen before deciding upon a path to take. The man I am referring to was known as Hijiri in your previous world. He died, but as fate would have it, he carried on in the Vortex world. Think back to when you first met him, to when the conception occurred. Yes, he did lose his life like the others. He was heading to the hospital, where you already were, when the conception began. And his life ended. Did it not seem odd to you that he was in the Vortex world unaffected, unchanged? It was all because of the mortal sin he committed. He was a being, toyed with by fate, condemned to carry the burden of atonement forever. His punishment was to see with his own eyes all that happens in the world, to record and balance events through all ages, a task as endless as scooping water out of the sea with a cup. He was condemned to wander the infinite span of time. Man can change the course of his next life by his karma, but that privilege was taken away from Hijiri. Though his body may perish, his soul will remain unsaved. He must continue on with his task. He lives a cursed, eternal life, just like a demon. Watch and record the history of the world. Witness the entirety of the endless war between chaos and order. That is your punishment for this unforgivable sin. Do you remember now? By the will of the Amala, he was given a life of torment and emerged in the vortex world without realizing that he had died. Soon after, your paths crossed again. That is probably because you had the potential to affect the course of the new world. So by accompanying you, he has unknowingly been fulfilling his destiny. Tragically, he has no memory of his sin, his punishment, or even his death. He believes that he survived the conception and has acted accordingly. As for the result of his efforts, you already know the outcome. In the body of a mannequin, Hijiri challenged those vying for creation, and he lost his body once again. He is now on a journey to a land of suffering, but his will can never be freed, and his sin never redeemed.
Now, this does not really change or affect who Hijiri is in-game, because I'll just explain something about who he was before the conception, or perhaps before his life in Nocturne's world altogether. To really break down what she's saying, Hijiri committed some terrible sin during his life pre the event of Nocturne. The explanation of his punishment is Sisyphean, or it is a punishment not unlike people who are sent to Tartarus. No, not the place in Persona 3, but that Greek place. Specifically, the punishment is related to scooping out the water from a sea, which relates to Daionides, who were the 50 daughters of Daeonus. They were to marry the 50 sons of Danaus' twin brother, Aegyptus, a mythical king of Egypt. In the most common version of the myth, all but one of them killed their husbands on their wedding night and were condemned to an eternity of trying to fill a bathtub with water to wash off their sins. But their jugs had holes, so it sucks because that's meant to be an endless task, and that sucks for you. Shouldn't have killed your husband. Here's another confusing ring in the tree of Nocturne's lore. That script that Nikki, TheFifthKalpa, follower on Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube, read is actually a Western translation, which means it has its own pitfalls, mostly with how some of the things are explained and phrased. Now, in the Japanese version, the main differences really come down to this line. That's the punishment for your unforgivable mortal sin. Do you understand? He was called to Amala's providence and suffered another unhappy birth to the curse of karma sin. Versus, that is your punishment for your unforgivable sin. Do you understand now? By the will of Amala, he was given a life of torment. The main difference is that in the Japanese version, they specifically say he was cursed by committing a mortal sin. That's a very specific phrase with very specific meaning. Mortal sins are a class of their own and essentially boil down to sins committed on purpose while knowing it was a crime against God. That sounds like an 11th tier crime, but considering examples of mortal sins such as the evils of lust, gluttony, avarice, sloth, anger, envy, pride, and that's not really a deep crime like literally killing Yahweh. That's a list of crimes that many people commit daily, which is part of the problem with this added exposition. It tries to explain the unique mannequins. There's also other unique mannequins, such as Fudomimi and Sakahagi. This is something I find to be overt in the game, but maybe not. So, spoiler alert, Fudomimi and Sakahagi die. But if you go down to the 4th Kalpa, you can find the Afterlife Bell, which allows you to fuse those two mannequins for your own personal use. In your quest, you meet a soul of an old businessman who talks about how he spent his life working and being successful. After his dialogue ends, he briefly laments about how he never really dealt with that rage in his black heart towards an unnamed boy. This man is Sakahagi. You can just tell simply by looking at the character, to be honest. His life is by all accounts pretty good seemingly, but inside he had the desire to murder, and as Sakahagi he was able to live this out. His mortal sin could be avarice or anger, since both are shown in his exposition. Do you think it's wrong to kill to your heart's content? This is the question that Fudomimi's spirit asks. He talks about how he spent his life doing nothing but inflicting pain and suffering, implied murder really, until he met a woman who changed him fundamentally. Meeting her caused him to want to change and be a better person. One who's liked for their kindness. When you purify the air by ringing the bell, he says something interesting too. I guess it's time to say goodbye to this place. The part of my soul that I am missing, the me that I really wanted to become, it's gonna wait with other demons for a new life. So these two souls are fragments of people who would become the mannequin Sakahagi and Fudomimi. Now Fudomimi's sin is pretty simple, he killed people, so murder would be the sin. These two are souls who are cursed, also. It's why they are different from the other mannequins. A real key difference is that the other mannequins vibrate quite frequently, but these special mannequins, they don't shake. Nope, they just stand all normal. So why is Hijiri's exposition one of the added things added to Maniac's version, the second release of the game? It's to explain why the mannequins are different. It's also why the other two mannequins get added exposition as well, so you can understand why those two demons are different. Wow, I guess I solved that age-old puzzle, huh? All the ducks are on a row. Okay, any questions? No questions? Okay, well, we're gonna move on. Now let's talk about Aleph. I'm not gonna spoil SMT2, even though I spoiled huge parts of Nocturne here. Just know SMT2 takes place after SMT1, sometime in 20XX. The manual for SMT2 actually gives us a timeline, and we know that this takes place somewhere after 2060. So it's the future, and Aleph is raging against the machine. Nothing matters for this video outside of the fact that in the neutral ending for SMT2, Yahweh decides to say something very interesting. The other endings don't have much variation in what Yahweh says pre and post fight, but this one says something interesting, and here's the dialogue translated by DJ, an expert translator with a vast knowledge of SMT, so thus it's more or less one-to-one what he actually says in the Japanese version of the game.
Praise my name. There is no one to rival my glory. Praise my name. Ye he finally showed to me. A cursed child of man, Aleph. Thou art a wicked human, a created being that cannot go against my law. Hiroko, thou hast offered thy body to create an accursed human. Not only have ye both violated my laws, ye even have come to stand before me. The many sins ye have committed are worth certain death. Still, after that irredeemable death, after the continuous persecutions in hell, your reincarnation shall be stricken by calamities and divine retribution until the very last. Ye accursed humans, ye finally committed the ultimate sin. Now there is nothing left for ye who have destroyed me, the Creator, the Father of all. Nothing to trust, nothing to rely on. Ye even have killed the Demon King Lucifer. What shall ye do by yourselves? Remember well, humans can live with nothing to trust or rely on. But humans are not strong. Every time humans shall seek my help, the great will of the universe shall bring me forth countless times.
So let's break this down. Yahweh refers to Aleph and Hiroko as accursed, which sounds pretty damning, but it's just the old sounding way of saying I hate you, you meddling kids, or F you. It's not literally him wishing a curse upon them, necessarily. He then says they both sin, and he names the sins, which they're worth death, and they're worth suffering in hell, and that their reincarnations will also be stricken with, quote-unquote, calamities and divine retribution until the end of time. That sounds pretty impressive and grandiose, but keep in mind this is a curse that will befall them if they lose, which they don't. And ominously, Yahweh does state, the great will indeed bring Yahweh back, should humans seek Yahweh out again. The damning evidence is that Aleph is cursed to be reborn after a stint in hell, because really Yahweh will return eventually. But is that the same thing as Hijiri's curse? The curse that he seemingly received in the beginning of the game when the conception happened. The same curse that Furumimi and Sakahage received. Watch and record the history of the world. Witness the entirety of the endless war between chaos and order. That is your punishment for your unforgivable sin. Do you understand now? By the providence of Amala, he was given a life of torment and emerged in the Vortex world, without realizing that he had died. That's Amala cursing Hijiri versus Yahweh cursing Hijiri, who is not the Great Will, by the way, cursing Hijiri. Meanwhile, in SMT2, Yahweh curses Aleph and Hiroko, and the punishment is hell plus to be reborn and for that rebirth to suck, and every subsequent rebirth to suck as well. Conditionals being that he wins the battle, which he doesn't, or that he will basically have to do that sometime in their lifetime if he returns during their lifetime. That begs the question, where is Hiroko in SMT3 then? Did she somehow miss out and not get reborn into the world of SMT3? Is she Chiaki? Is she the lady in black? Never mind that this game would literally be in a timeline that is in the early 2000s, so in the past of the events of SMT2. If you can leap that hard, then anyone who has a bad time in long hair and Nocturne could be Aleph. Conveniently, would just have to ignore Hiroko's curse too. And also, let me remind you that SMT2's updated PS1 art was released the same year as Nocturne was released. So if it was meant to be that Aleph equals Hijiri, then they didn't really do a good job of making him look similar, beyond long hair and being drawn by Kaneko. Oh dang, wait, I guess that means Baofu is also Hijiri. Let me use my 3 comparative criteria. Long hair, check, yeah. God hates him, yeah, check. And he's drawn by Kaneko. Oh my Yahweh. As I said, it's very possible that since Yahweh will inevitably return, maybe he redeemed his curse when he came back, and sure, maybe the planet was reborn, and curiously Yahweh gave the creator job to his cousin, Kagatsuchi, and the Great Will let Amala take being the great entity, a Toral. But the general consideration should be the more you have to consider exceptions to the theory you're crafting, the less likely it's to be true. Come on, Occam's razor, guys. So what did we learn? We learned that the curse Aleph gets is pretty vague, but it's very different from the curse that Hijiri receives in Nocturne, which not only did Hijiri receive, but so did Sakahagi and Fudomimi, both of whom got extra exposition, as did Hijiri, in the Maniacs version of Nocturne. The curse that Hijiri receives is also a curse given to him by the will of Amala, or the providence of Amala, providence being the decision made by God, and if this is not the Abrahamic God, then Amala is a separate entity, or is equivalent to the Great Will. The other consideration is Aleph's curse could only be enacted whenever Yahweh returns, and Yahweh isn't in Nocturne. The way the lore is presented in SMT2 versus SMT3 is that the closest proxy to Yahweh would be Kagatsuchi, and the closest proxy to the Great Will would be Amala. Note that they call it the providence of Amala, therefore making Amala a character rather than a place. So we get this completely different creator deity and a completely different system for rebirth, which, by the way, Kaneko did say he did on purpose. If you've seen my other videos, you know that. If you want to have pet theories, sure, go ahead. But there is nothing about Hijiri initially, or even after his added backstory, that was added in the second release of Nocturne, by the way, that tells me that Hijiri is Aleph. Wait, why is his name Hijiri then? It translates to holy man. Actually, you know, it technically translates better to saint. Saint Joji, Joji being a Japanification of George. Then you get the name Saint George, which is fitting because Kaneko loves wordplay. Saint George is most famous for slaying a dragon that wanted human sacrifices, a brave act by all accounts. Conversely, Hijiri is a coward who wants to hoard power and sacrifice humans, which sounds a lot like a European dragon. That being said, that seems a lot like a joke that Kaneko would make when making a character. So there you have my take based on all the evidence. So the game really doesn't give any room for you to speculate that Aleph and Hijiri are the same. If you want to ignore what the game is telling you in order to make those connections, go ahead and do that. But if you like to be right, don't do it. Thanks for watching the video. Feel free to tell me that you are going to keep thinking that Hijiri and Aleph are the same in the comments. I'm sorry for raining on your parades. Actually, never mind, I'm not sorry. I love it. Goodbye, fellow Megatenists. So I know I was really aggressive in this video, but I do want to say that I don't care if you want to do fan theories. I don't care if you want to do fan timelines. I just don't like the weird fan theory as fact thing that people will do, because the games were never meant to be connected all together. Only a handful of them are. And though that handful is basically old SMT, Persona, and Devil Summoner. When you take those like games into account and you have to ignore literally everything else, come on. And my final epilogue to this, I guess, is that people really tried to convince me that Nocturne has no story, but the fact that I had to make a 50-minute video and cut it down to whatever the length is now, just to tell a very simple part of the story, tells me that there really is a rich experience to be had in Nocturne. And don't let anyone tell you that Nocturne has a very light story. It's very rich, and the characterization is there. Just actually experience it for yourself. Goodbye, fellow Megatenists.